Hey everybody, welcome to Farming Matters, a storytelling series where you get to hear from innovative farmers and ranchers across the North Central region. We have a special guest today, Frank Kutka from Wisconsin. But before we let Frank take it away, I want to introduce myself. I'm Liz Brownlee and I work for SARE, that's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and I'm joined by our director and producer, Marie.
Hello, everyone.
And we get the distinct pleasure of interviewing people who have had SARE grants and are doing innovative things. Today, the topic is corn breeding. And I think I'm going to learn a lot, and I hope you will too. So, without more any further ado, Frank, would you take it away?
Thanks so much. Hi to both of you. I grew up on a farm in southern Wisconsin and studied field biology, animal ecology, and then eventually decided plant breeding would be the most exciting thing to do next. And so I have a degree in plant breeding, and I worked for North Dakota State University for a while and assisted the SARE program out there in the Dakotas. Currently living in Wisconsin and teaching at College of Menominee Nation and helping to start a agriculture degree program here. I have also, throughout all this time, been a plant breeder at home and fascinated to see where we might apply that in some useful way to improve sustainability possibilities. And this project was the one I put forward, and thankfully it was funded. Part of the idea behind this seed corn project was to see whether or not we could breed better open pollinated corn today. Um, Open pollinated or just mixed population corn is the kind of corn that was grown for most of the 7 or 8 thousand years that people have been growing corn. And hybrids, lovely as they are a recent innovation from the early 1900s that have pretty much taken over the entirety of commerce. However, farmers used to be corn breeders, and I and a team of farmers were very interested to see whether or not it would be possible to go back to something we could produce at home and breed and improve ourselves and make it commercially viable. So we decided to take a look at that. So this lovely squiggle graph here actually has three distinct lines based on plant populations. And it is a display of the yield potential of different corn hybrids from Pioneer Hybrid. I wish it would stop doing that. Um, based on when they were released. And so starting with open pollinated varieties that we had back in the 30s, and then different hybrids that Pioneer has released over time, you see that the yield potential for varieties have greatly increased. There's been a lot of breeding done for the hybrids. There's been nothing done for the open pollinated varieties, which are currently still yielding and standing as much as they ever did. But we kind of intrigued, well, what might we do with those? Obviously, it would take a lot of work to catch up to some of this. The breeders have been working, whereas the farmers have not been saving seeds anymore. However, doing some calculations, we find that in a table like this, which just shows the cost of feeding individual livestock every day versus the seed cost of corn that might go into their feed based on these four different types of feeds we might put together, that expensive hybrids cost more to purchase a seed, and it's cheaper to feed animals if you get seeds that are cheaper. And of course, the cheapest option would be to grow it yourself if you're halfway good at that and get good quality seed. Savings of 5 to 10% are possible that way. Same goes for having corn with higher protein. Corn normally has protein of anywhere from 8 or 9 at the base up to 12 naturally, but the hybrids have been really pushing starch production over the years, and their protein has gone very, very much lower. And so if we could somehow get corn that was back up to where it used to be, we again would save ourselves 5 to 10%. So these savings could be very real if you have an animal feeding operation and growing corn for them. Well, this is how single cross hybrids are made. These are the standards these days. You have two different inbreds. You allow them to cross. One provides the the pollen, and the other one will grow the seeds. And then those F1 hybrid seeds go to farmers to plant, and they grow them once, and that's it. The yields are amazing. The varieties are quite good, but you can't readily do that yourself at home. It's a little bit trickier. You can. It's just it's very easy to purchase them. But what could we do at home? How could we come up with something that would compete with a system like this? How would we get an open pollinated variety to suddenly catch up to 100 years of hybrid improvement? Well, as it turns out, there are other alternatives. And back in the early 1900s, hybrids were not the only option being discussed by the breeders. They also talked about synthetic varieties, where we found outstanding inbred varieties, selfed out of some of the best corn, and you cross those all together to synthesize or recreate a new population that just has the very best genetics of what you have available. And Sewell Wright came up with a formula for how to predict which ones would be the likely ones to put together in a paper published in 1922. Herbert Kendall Hayes at University of Minnesota worked on these for many years. Not much else happened with them. Everybody dove in deep on double cross hybrids, which also were thought of at the same time. USDA funded it. Universities all ran with it. But Dr. Hayes and his students did play with this some, and he said distinctly that synthetic varieties were going to be just as good or better than any open pollinated thing we had, and equal to or better than double cross hybrids, which were the standards in the 50s and 60s. No one ever followed up with that. Most farmers did not have the wherewithal to work on this, and the university scientists had no reason to work on it, and so no one's really done a lot with synthetic varieties here. Some synthetics have been put together for breeding programs, just to put together something that would allow them to find new inbreds for improved hybrids. A few synthetics have been released internationally, but there really hasn't been anything with it here in the States. Although Dr. Hayes assured us this could really be something to look at. So I wanted to look at it, and so did my partners. So what did we do? Well, this lovely table here has some results from the multi-state work that was funded through SARE. We made test crosses to find out what things we could cross with one open pollinated population to boost its yield significantly. So the upper rows in white are crosses made with different groups of inbreds of specific types that are commonly used to make hybrid corn. So these numbers all come from university programs, so B73s, B37s, Iodents, Missouri 17s, and so forth. That's just all technical talk for corn breeders, but it's just what kind of parent source might cross well with this OP and make it perform better. Well, some of those were pretty decent because those all come out of older commercial inbred lines, except for at the lower part there, EP1 by CO255 and the 80.1. Those are northern flinty types, and those just didn't do much of anything. So the other ones looked promising. Those did not. In blue, we had some test crosses made with some exotic varieties just to see if that might be interesting and fun. Food quality was great, except for the Conico from Mexico. The yields were not that impressive. In green were the open pollinated varieties that we looked at. These are available out there right now. And unfortunately, the dairyland we used for our test crosses was not very good at all. Stan Smith has an OP he grows on his farm in Minnesota, coming out of his work with a former SARE grant. And that one's pretty darn good for an open pollinated population. And then at the bottom in orange are two Czech hybrids that Foundation Direct was kind enough to share with us. And those top the charts, 200 bushels an acre and plus in some locations pretty handily. So none of our test crosses were astounding. None of them looked like they would be great hybrids in and of themselves that you could make at home, unfortunately. But they seemed like maybe there's some potential there to get up to the higher end of where open pollinated populations currently are going. So we crossed some together. That's fun things I get to do in my garden. I'm sure you're just growing lovely peppers and tomatoes and beans and flowers, and I'm out there with paper bags making crosses of corn. But we all got a thing. And this is a group of some of the ears that came out of the F1 of that first grow out of that population. Roger Coulter grew those in New York State, and we wanted to see, well, what would the F2 do? That will tell us a little bit more of its long-term potential. Are we really doing anything useful here? Well, now it's actually put itself forward in the correct time. That's nice. Well, we went back to university partners again with SARE funding. Thank you very much. And these are the preliminary numbers that we currently have thus far. So thus far, this new population is the top of the charts for any open pollinated population we've currently seen. Not quite up to the hybrids, unfortunately, but we're seeing in the Midwest anyway, 150 to nearly 180 bushels to the acre, which is pretty good for seed you can grow yourself. In Penn State, it bombed, just came in at 50% of what could happen. This happens with varieties, and in case you're not aware, no variety, whether hybrid or otherwise, is the top of the charts everywhere. And ours certainly was not the top of the charts in Pennsylvania. We're looking to see what the other universities will report, and then we'll get this out to farmers. But pretty excited that it's at least going in a positive direction that way. So lessons learned. Um, our test crosses taught us how to assemble a good synthetic, didn't show us how to make a good on-farm hybrid that people could make, unfortunately. A lot of our test crosses and the open pollinated varieties do have higher protein. If fed on farm, Stan's OP is somewhat economically competitive as it is with the higher price hybrids right now. It's good corn. Um, Crunching the numbers, it looks like on-farm seed production could make seed that is cheaper, that could save some money here and there. It's not going to be gigantic savings. We're looking at 5 to 10% cost savings here and there. I will be growing my own seed, however. I'm pretty excited about where this is going. And we can make some predictions. So when and if the day comes where we have an OP that would yield 90% of hybrids, because it's so much cheaper to plant, it would be economically competitive for grain production pretty much across the board. If we come up with one that's 80% of hybrids and has 10% protein or higher, it would be economically competitive if we feed it on farm. So we now know, where the bar is set and what we have to hit. Currently, yield-wise, we're hitting about 70 or 75% on yield, so we're not quite there. I think some more work would have to be done in order to hit those. I would say to anyone who's interested in this, if you're very interested, talk to me, talk to some of the folks in the project. Need to learn a little bit about seed saving and on-farm breeding. However, whatever you know about corn production and how to get grain dry and stored is, got you 99% there. Plant breeding is just a small tweak at the very end. And of course, Jenkuya, thank you to everyone who helped so much, all of our university partners, the SARE program, and corn breeders and seed savers everywhere.
That was great, Frank. That was really helpful to my novice plant genetics brain. One question I have is more on the people side, though, is, you know, a lot of the seed saving knowledge is, I figure, has been lost as as farmers' generations have aged out of production. Is there concern about, or how are you thinking that will be addressed?
Oh, conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that has been set aside. Um, Plant breeding was a part of 4-H for decades. That's all long since been
Hmm.
set aside. There are very few books out there that directly, deal with this for farmers. There are a couple that are adaptable, certainly, but yeah, anyone who's intrigued to take up plant breeding and seed saving for on-farm would do well to get a book about seed saving, look into some of that, read on plant breeding per se. Some of the old USDA stuff is still good. Um, they had bulletins for on-farm breeding, of course. Um, the vegetable folks have in-garden plant breeding books available. The basic concepts are covered there, but yeah, breeding discussions, talking to farmers who save seeds, that's what's going to have to happen. And, that's how we learn it anyway. So it's just reinvigorating sharing this particular slice of knowledge.
Frank, I recognize
Absolutely.
the names that you had listed on this project. And I can think of some other people that I know that are doing open pollinated corn work. Is there an organization or an event or anything like that where y'all come together and talk about these topics?
At this point, no. I used to have a newsletter for open pollinated corn growers, but it's been a while. I still have a Facebook blog where I share things here and there. But for the most part, we're kind of disparate and not connected. It would actually be very nice to have some sort of workshop and bring us all together with a Zoom and get to know each other. I do see that there are a lot of folks who do not yet have gray hair stepping into this sort of area, and it would be great to find out what they're up to and what kind of exciting adventures they're underway.
And it sounds like you're waiting on some results still on this from some of the university trials, but then you're going to be sharing out to growers, to researchers. Who's your sort of target there?
Well, I'm going to make it pretty wide open. I'm going to make a recording of a basically expanded version of what we just did here with all of the extra data and just put that up with some talking behind it on YouTube and through Facebook. But I'm also hoping to do a Zoom like this and just open it up, put the word out and see how many people might pop in and just, yeah, start chatting about the possibilities here and what has to happen next. See if any hardcore university breeders would like to get in on this, and if any very serious farmers would really like to undertake it. Most of us are kind of on the small end, and there are fewer and fewer of us farmers all the time. So making that connection soon would probably be very helpful.
Sooner is better. Frank, you mentioned, I think, a variety or two in the trail that were coming from Mexico. And obviously, you work now at the College of Menominee Nations, so you're working with indigenous growers. Is there a piece of this genetics conversation that's happening with indigenous or traditional growers of corn, folks who have been doing this plant breeding for generations upon generations?
Well, of course, every tribal nation in the country that still has seeds, shares information on how to save seed and take care of the lovely plant partners that they have. Some of the tribal colleges have seed increase projects underway. I know Noita Hidatsa Sanish College out in North Dakota has a big project going to revive and share out some of the old varieties there coming out of the USDA collection. Uh, Others are exploring those too, and also working to maintain things that do still happen to be at home. Uh, there is an Indigenous Seed Keepers Network going across the country with, I think, several different regional chapters. I'm hoping to be talking about some of the traditional corn here at the Great Lakes Indigenous Farming Conference in March, where I hope to introduce our new project from CMN, which is going to be a variety trial with northern Flint varieties, the types that indigenous people had here for a couple thousand years, just to remind people that this is the corn that was around and introduce it to people who've never met it. and have our students learn about how to evaluate the corn and evaluate food quality and some of those sorts of things.
The reality, at least where I am in Indiana, is almost all the corn being grown is hybrid. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I was doing open pollinated corn, is that easier because my neighbors are all doing hybrids, or is it harder?
No matter what your neighbors are growing, saving seed is always a trick.
Okay.
You always have to think about distance and some sort of isolation, no matter what it is they've got. Buffalo Bird Woman talked about corn walking and that they were familiar with the idea that if you plant white corn, yellow corn's going to appear magically. Well, how did that happen? They didn't know, but they sure knew it did. And they would start planting all the same variety to try and avoid that because they like pure varieties. Um, Same thing goes here. So some distance is very helpful. Having a windbreak, always a nice thing on farms anyway. That can be helpful for offering some isolation to your seed corn. There's also some genetic tricks, um, such as using gametophytic incompatible corn. There's one for you, which is a very long phrase that just says that some corn have specific genes in them that provide them some protection from crossing with other varieties that don't have those genes. And that's how they grow popcorn varieties in Indiana and Illinois, Iowa, all the I states and Nebraska. Popcorn can be grown without crossing with the dent corn because it has a specific gene. Well, we could also grow corn varieties with that gene as long as our neighbors weren't growing any of those popcorn varieties, and then we wouldn't have much crossing either. So there are different techniques for isolation, but isolation would, of course, always be a concern. Now, if your neighbor's growing fabulous hybrids and changes once in a while, well, a little bit of that slipping into your corn isn't the end of the world. It might even boost it a little bit. So, um, who knows what the possibilities are? That's the thing about corn. It keeps trying to be more outcrossed if it can.